case of the runaway reptile. Nancy, have you seen Watson around? He's not in his cage, and I don't see him anywhere in the eagle's nest. You won't believe this, Jake, but Watson was all the way over at the library. Mrs. Meninsky found him. It scared her to death. I stopped in to get a book on space for my science class, and Mrs. Garcia asked me to bring him back to you. She was kind of mad. The library? How could he have gotten there? He must have escaped sometime last night, or maybe he was lizard napped. I'll bring him right up. Oh no, was the lizard napped? Alright, apparently this is the first place we're supposed to go to check out the case. Let's go to the scene of the crime. Well, I guess it's not really the scene of the crime. How did Watson get all the way over here? It's way too far for him to get to from the treehouse by himself. Let's see if he's doing. Let's see if we do research on iguanas. Let's see if that'll help us out. Let's ask this librarian lady, Mrs. Garcia. Well, Jake, I must say I was not amused by your little joke. Mrs. Meninsky was startled out of her wits when she found Watson creeping under her table. It wasn't us, Miss Garcia. Honest, we wouldn't just leave Watson here. Then I think we'll all feel better if you find out who was responsible. I don't believe for 1 minute that your lizard walked here from your treehouse all by himself. Can you tell us who was in the library when Watson was found? Well, Mrs. Meninsky comes to the library every Saturday morning around this time. She likes to read under the skylights. Mark Moriarty, Eric Vicor, and Mike Walker were here also. Mark and Mike left for the park a few minutes ago, but Eric is still here studying. Looks like there he is now. Hey, Eric. Hey, Jake. Hi, Doublemint. Guess you guys heard about the excitement here earlier. Poor Mrs. Meninsky. Shut up, Eric. You're talking too loudly. I was just sitting here studying for my social studies quiz when I heard her scream. Eric is wearing a blue sweater. A loose bit of yarn is trailing from the bottom, as if he had snagged it on something. There is a large box under the table where Eric is sitting. I wonder if the iguana was in there. Could it have been Eric? Let's see. A book on reptiles has a chapter on iguanas. The book says that reptiles are cold-blooded and need to have a heat source to keep warm. The chapter on iguanas states that they can grow up to 6 feet long, are native to the rainforests of South America, are mainly vegetarian, and since this is an educational program, I have no idea if this is supposed to help us with our case. The book also suggests that iguanas kept as pets. It says that they should be provided with a rock that is electrically heated to keep them from getting cold, a tree branch to climb on, and a light source that provides ultraviolet light and sunlight. Like we're gonna treat Watson to that after running away. He'd better have been lizard or iguana napped. Where else can we look? Let's go to the park. Yeah, skateboards. To get to the library from the treehouse, Watson would have had to come through Taylor Park. Maybe we can find some clues here. Hey Mike, what's up? You guys missed it. Mrs. Meninsky completely freaked out at the library. Your iguana somehow got loose, I guess, and nobody noticed it got into the library till it ran over her feet. The funny thing is, just the other day, Eric Vicor and I overheard Mrs. Meninsky saying to Mrs. Garcia that she is totally terrified of your lizard. Like maybe somebody tried to prank her. She said just living next to you, knowing that Watson is in the treehouse, gives her the creeps. But I think Watson's a cool pet. He looks like a little dinosaur. Mark Moriarty, what are you doing here? Dude, I thought you were a girl from behind. Hey, your iguana really stirred things up at the library. Mrs. Minisky saw him, and she about had a cow. That was a great prank, you guys. Prank? We didn't have anything to do with it. Well, someone sure got a kick out of it. Eric Vigor and Mike Walker were totally cracking up. You should have seen the look on Mrs. Minisky's face. I thought she was gonna croak. Mrs. Garcia caught me laughing, but she knew I couldn't have done it. She saw me come in, and I was only carrying my book on cave diving, not some big old lizard. What if the trees in the park has a frisbee stuck in it? Hey Mike, isn't that your frisbee? Yeah, way up in that stupid tree. If I didn't hate heights, I'd go get it myself, but Eric will be by soon. He's a great tree climber. I'll ask him to get it down for me. Suspicious. A frisbee in a tree. That'll help solve our case. Hey, it's Nancy, I think. What are we doing here, Jake? Watson, our pet iguana, usually hangs out with us here in the eagle's nest. Get it? Like that's like our last name. He must have crawled out of the window and down the tree sometime last night. Nancy, what's up? I'm sorry, Jake. I was sure I didn't leave that window open. It was cold out last night, so I shut it before I left. Come to think of it, if it was cold out, Watson would never have left of his own accord. Reptiles hate the cold. Maybe someone took him. Watson is a common green iguana. He is green and blue and has a spiny ridge down his back. Watson's skin is rough and dry. His nails are long and sharp, so he can climb trees easily. Watson's tank is on the bookshelf. The tank contains a warming rock and a bowl of water. I think that book suggested something else. Oh, wait, the warming rock is electric. It gives off a little heat to warm Watson's tank. The treehouse window looks like it was forced open. Hey, look at that! A bit of blue yarn is snagged on a nail outside the window. Wow, it's a long way down to Mrs. Minisky's yard from the window. If someone came up this way to steal Watson, they'd have to be a really good tree climber. Let's check our notes. Who's the really good tree climber? Was it Eric? I'm gonna guess that it was either Eric or Mike Walker. I don't think Mark Moriarty did it this time. Eric is a good tree climber, and he's wearing a blue sweater today. And there was a box sitting under his library table. I think it's Eric. But we still haven't checked out the Minisky's house, so I guess we'll go over there. What an adorable house. I hope Mrs. Minisky isn't too mad. Her house is right next door to our tree house. How are you, Mrs. Minisky? There I was, just sitting down for a nice quiet read in the library, when I felt something scramble over my foot. I looked down and saw that dreadful creature of yours scurrying under the table. It gave me such a shock. I think it's unnatural to have such a creature as a pet. You two should have a cat or dog, not that nasty lizard. I hate cats, Mrs. Meninsky. Mrs. Meninsky's garage door is open. There's a box inside with some baseballs and a frisbee inside. Now just stay out of there, you two. Those are toys that I found in my yard. As I was explaining to Eric Vicar earlier, I don't appreciate you children playing on my property. If I find your toys here, I will simply take them away. That baseball there on top is Eric's. He wasn't very happy when I refused to return it, but that will teach him not to play in my garden. Well, now we have motive. I think we can solve the case. Eric is mad at Mrs. Meninsky, so he decided to take my lizard as a prank and surprise her. A piece of blue yarn has to be a good tree climber. Now let's see if we can point out who's responsible for Watson's mysterious appearance at the library. Yes, we're right. It was Eric who took Watson. He wanted to get back at Mrs. Meninsky for confiscating his ball. Let's check the evidence. Nancy said that she was sure I shut the treehouse window before I left yesterday. The window to the treehouse was open this morning and a piece of blue yarn was caught on the nail. Nancy pointed out that your treehouse is really high up above Mrs. Meninsky's yard. Whoever climbed up the tree and must be a great tree climber. Watson was found in the library, clear across town. He couldn't have gotten there by himself. Mrs. Garcia told us that Mrs. Meninsky was really frightened by Watson crawling over her feet. She said that Mark Moriarty, Eric Vicar, and Mike Walker were at the library when it happened. Mrs. Meninsky said that she had recently confiscated one of Eric Vicar's baseballs that I found in the yard. Mark Moriarty told us that he saw Mark and Eric Vicar laughing at Mrs. Meninsky's fright. We ran into Mike Walker in Taylor Park. His frisbee was stuck up in a tree. Mike said that I hate heights, but that Eric Vicar is really good at climbing trees. Eric was wearing a blue sweater today that looked as though it had been snagged on something. You figured it out. We figured it out. Eric Vicar snuck into the treehouse and borrowed Watson to play a nasty trick on Mrs. Meninsky. Or Meninsky. We can't decide what her name is. It's great to have Watson back safe and sound. Yeah, and thanks to Doublemint ourselves, that is, Mrs. Garcia knows we didn't play that prank on Mrs. Meninsky. We were framed. Everyone who read the front page article in the Tiger Press knows too. Check it out. Lizard prank exposed. Watson the iguana, the reptilian mascot of the Eagle Eye Detective Agency, was lizard-napped and used in a childish prank at the public library Saturday morning. At first, said Jake Eagle, Mrs. Garcia suspected that we were behind the prank, but Doublemint proved that Eric Vicar was behind the trick. When we confronted him with the evidence collected by Doublemint, Eric Vicar confessed. Eric broke into the eagle's nest so he could borrow the iguana to scare Mrs. Meninsky. Mrs. Meninsky had recently confiscated Eric's baseball when he carelessly left it in her yard. Looking for revenge, Eric remembered that Mrs. Meninsky has a dread fear of the harmless mascot of Eagle Eye Detectives, so he climbed the tree in which the Eagle's Nest treehouse lies and took the lizard to the library, where he knew Mrs. Meninsky would be. Mrs. Garcia of the Ridgeview Library stated, "Thanks to Doublemint's detective work, the mystery of the runaway reptile is solved. Eric Vigor will have to find another place to study this month. The library is closed to him."